Hello. My lesson plan is geared towards middle school. It's a lesson on the elements of art. Um, the first slide shows the goals and objectives. The second slide explains that the students would have read Chapter 2, Lesson 1 the night before, or a day or two before, depending on when your last class was. And then we would go over there are 7 elements of art, and there is a graphic organizer on the second slide, and we would fill that out together as a class. Then on the third slide, there's a short movie clip on the elements of art. It's a YouTube video. Then the fourth slide, again, goes over the 7 elements of art, lists them, just to give repetition to get students familiar with them so that they, in some of the research that we read in our book for this class, it said that students needed to see vocabulary at least 6 times before they could even be familiar with it or to start learning it. So I tried to go over as much as I could, the same 7 elements. And then the fifth slide is, as we go through today's lesson, think about the following questions. What is art? What are the different elements of art? And why is it important to know the language of art? So it's just getting students prepared to, in the mindset of what they should be thinking about as they go through the lesson. Then the sixth slide, I have a printed out sheet of, everything that you can say throughout each slide if you're the teacher going through this, but basically just comparing atoms and molecules to art, how all the different interlocking pieces, create a great piece of artwork. So all the different elements, you can use 1 or 2 different elements, you can use 3 or 4, just depending on what the artwork is, but all of them work together to create something different and something new, but something that all goes together, like the water molecule was the example in this slide. Then the next slide is talking about form and shape, and there's, sculptures are obviously going to be go along those lines, but then there's also the 2D aspect of it, and that goes into MC Escher, which is the next slide. And then another slide that talks about 3-dimensional space in a 2-dimensional work, which is also another example of MC Escher. Then the next slide talks about positive and negative space. So again, we're still talking about space, which is one of the elements. The next slide goes into talking about line, this horizontal line. Then slide 12 talks about vertical lines. Slide 13 talks about diagonal lines. Again, 14, same thing, but 2-dimensional diagonal lines. And then the next slide talks about repeated lines, how it can create pattern, like how Van Gogh did, and how it creates a rhythm. Then the next slide, slide 16, talks about shape, and the different types of shapes that you can have in a piece of work. Slide 17 talks about texture in 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional. 18 talks about texture in 2-dimensional photographs. And then slide 19 is an example of Pollock and his textural work. Slide 20 talks about color and value. 21 talks about intensity of color. 22 is an example of color being used by Sandy Skokland. She also uses, obviously a lot of other different types of elements in her artwork because she does sculpture. She uses a lot of texture, space. She also photographs everything that she does, so this is actually a photograph of her sculpted artwork and a staged setting. Then on slide 23, there is a website that the students can experiment with. Working with the different elements, they can create their own artwork using shape, color, texture, all those different elements, and then they can also look at artworks involving those different elements. It's a really neat website for them to work with, so I would give students some time to work with that. Then on slide 24, I would have students break up into groups of 2 and have them fill out match the word with the definition, which again is the elements, is giving them that repeated exposure to the vocabulary so that they can learn those. And then slide 25, in those same groups of 2, I would have students discuss this piece of artwork and talk about the different elements that are in the artwork, what they think works, what doesn't work, what they would change if they could, the effect that it has on the viewer, all those different things. And then on slide 26, we would come back together as a class, discuss the questions from earlier at the very beginning of the class. What is art? What are the different elements of art? And why is it important to know the language of art? So we would talk about all those things as a class. And then slide 27 is the homework. Students will find a piece of artwork that strongly exhibits each of the elements. All work has to have at least 1 or 2 elements of art. So students should be able to find one piece of artwork for each element. Then I want students to pick one of those artworks or another piece of work to write a 1-page paper about. And in that paper I want the students to discuss all the elements a work of art has, why they think the artist chose to use those elements and or those choices, and how it affects the viewer. So kind of like they did in groups of 2 on the previous slides. I was on slide 25, but just doing this on their own in a 1-page paper. Then also students should state what they like or dislike about it and what they would change if they could, and how or why they think that that change would make it better. And then on the very last slide, I just have slide 28. I would have the students save this slide. Actually, I would have them save all of these slides if they could, or just keep it as a playback so they could watch it a few times. But this list of artists would just give them, a start for looking for those pieces of artworks that go with each element. All those artists, are well known, and well, some of them are less well known, but regardless, it gives them a start of a Google search to look for certain artists rather than just randomly searching for different elements. It'd be easier to go to these artists and see which categories those pieces of works fit into with those elements. So that is it for the lesson. I think it incorporates note-taking with the vocab. It has video. It has an interactive website for them to work on. It has group work. It has the graphic organizer. It has the questions beforehand and the objectives, and then at the end of class it revisits those questions for the students to go over. So I think it has a lot of the elements that we've been talking about in our class for classroom instruction that works. So I hope you like the lesson, and thank you very much.